All right, starting the stream. And happy International Women's Day, everyone. And welcome to your weekly Kubernetes community meeting. I'll be your host today, George Castro. We've got an action-packed meeting for you today. We're going to start with a Kubeflow demo, some release updates, the graph of the week with Zach, and then two SIG updates today, one from SIG Apps and one from SIG-OpenStack. So if you would, please give Jeremy your full attention, and let's start with the demo.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everybody for coming to, or thank you for this opportunity to show you and talk to you a little bit briefly about Kubeflow. So just by way of quick background, with Kubeflow, what we're trying to do is we think that from Google we've learned that ML is really sort of a distributed systems problem, in the sense that if you're trying to run ML at scale and in production, you have a lot of different components that you need to run. So as an example, you might run Jupyter to give your data scientists a tool and environment that they want to use. You might need to run TensorFlow to run distributed TensorFlow jobs. You might need, and train models, you might need to use TensorFlow serving to actually serve your models. You might want to use a workflow engine like Argo or Airflow to write complex workflows. You might want to use a framework like Beam or Spark to do data preprocessing and batch inference. So there's all these different components that you have to manage and deploy. And we think that Kubernetes really is a great platform for solving these DevOps problems. And so with Kubeflow, we're just trying to make it super easy to deploy an ML stack consisting of the components that we think a lot of ML practitioners and data scientists want to use. And so what we give you right now is we make it really easy to spin up Jupyter Hub so that you get an IDE that's sort of friendly for data scientists in their standard notebook environment. We give you a TensorFlow CRD, which makes it easy to manage and run distributed TensorFlow jobs. And then we also provide some syntactic sugar for deploying TensorFlow models in the form of K-Sinet components, packages. Then we also have packaging to deploy all these components using K-Sinet. And we include a bunch of other components such as Argo for doing workflows, Seldon for deploying non-TensorFlow models, and we're constantly adding more. And so the first thing that we do is we make it super easy using K-Sinet to deploy this entire stack. And so what we're showing you here is these are the commands that you basically run to deploy with K-Sinet. And the main idea is that you add you add your registry where all of the packages and components are deployed. You then install the components, and then you can generate the templates that you actually want to run, and then you actually deploy them. And one of the reasons that we picked K-Sinet and we really like K-Sinet is because it has an inherent notion of an environment. And that's really useful because we think that one of the common workflows that ML practitioners go through is they run a model or develop a model locally, and then they move it to the cloud, or they move it to their on-prem cluster. And we want to make it really easy for them to only change the couple parameters that they care about when moving between those two environments. So as an example, when you move from running locally to running in the cloud, you might want to scale out horizontally and add more nodes when you train. And you might want to also use more resources like GPUs. And so we think that K-Sinet's a great answer for that. But we are paying close attention to the ongoing discussions in Kubernetes for application management and looking better. So if you switch over, oops. Uh-oh. Okay, so what we've done is I've deployed a Kubeflow, and I've got Kubeflow running. So I ran those commands that I just showed. And so now what I've got is running on my Kubernetes cluster is Jupyter Hub. And so I've used Jupyter Hub to spin up a Kubernetes a notebook. And the nice thing about using Kubernetes to run Jupyter Hub is that we can take advantage of Kubernetes to do all the resource scheduling. So it's really easy with Jupyter Hub, and I should have shown the UI, but I skipped it, to, when you spawn a notebook, say, I want so many CPUs, I want so many GPUs, and under the hood, we do all the scheduling with using Kubernetes. And so we basically have all the commands that a user would want to run. And then most of I'm skipping over most of like the just basic cluster setup or sort of notebook setup. And then this is the interesting part, right? So here what we have is we have a K-net component that we've defined for defining our TensorFlow custom resources. And so we can run it and we can submit a job. And so the idea here is that we have a custom TensorFlow resource that specifies the things that gives people a higher level API for running, for submitting TensorFlow jobs, and in particular, distributed TensorFlow jobs, right? So if you run distributed TensorFlow, you have end processes that you have to manage. That can get quite complicated if you're trying to use the built-in Kubernetes resources and you have to manage multiple job controllers or multiple pods or multiple deployments. So instead, we built a custom resource. That custom resource is going to manage all the different K8 resources that you actually need. And so all the user has to specify is the things they care about, such as their code, their parameters, et cetera. But we explicitly give you the full power of like the Kubernetes APIs, so you can take advantage of like pod APIs to do things like attach volumes, credentials, et cetera. And so after you do that, so you can submit the job. That's what I've shown here. So you can basically see the job and it's submitted by K-net and running on your cluster. Then, usually when you run TensorFlow, you want to spin up TensorBoard to monitor your jobs. So you can go and launch a TensorBoard job as well. And then one of the nice things that we've done with TensorBoard, sorry, the Zoom widget gets in the way of mine. Yeah. So one of the problems that we've solved is we've included Ambassador as a reverse proxy, and that allows us to dynamically add routes to our ingress. So in this case, we're serving TensorBoard at TensorBoard / name of my model, and those routes get added dynamically so that we can, because in ML, a lot of the services that we're going to bring up are going to be ephemeral. So you only run TensorBoard while your job is training. And so using a reverse proxy like Ambassador, we can dynamically add those routes. And that's pretty much it. So I think I finished on time, and I think there's even time for a couple questions if people have them.
Yep, we definitely have time for questions. Please toss them in chat or go ahead and unmute on Zoom and ask your question.
Where should folks go if they want to find more information?
So we're on github.com/Kubeflow. And then we also have a Slack channel on kubeflow.slack.com.
Okay, awesome. Great, thanks. Moving on. Just a quick reminder to everybody that this meeting is being streamed live on YouTube and being recorded for the public record. Also, anybody who wants to help me out taking notes during these presentations would be really appreciated. Some release updates. Jace Dumars can't make it today, so I've asked him to put all the release information here in the notes. Most importantly, it's basically you have 2 weeks left, and code freeze will end on March 14th at 6 p.m. Pacific time. And all the information that you need there is just pasted in the notes. If you have any questions, you can ping either Jason or Dumars, or Josh Burkus will probably help you out. And we will move on to Graph of the Week with Zach.
Hello. So I'm going to ask that you go ahead and pull up the graph, please, while I talk. Back towards the end of the year, we started thinking about metrics.
You're not going to be able to see it because I'm sharing my screen.
At the end of the year, we started thinking about metrics for response time for SIG docs. How long was it taking us? I had a vaguely anxious sense that we were taking too long, but fortunately, I was able to realize I have no actual data basis for that vague anxiety. So when Paris first shared this console, or when I first encountered it, I realized that this was a really valuable treasure trove for setting we don't say service level agreement, because agreement is a scary word, but we say service level objective in SIG-Docs for how long should we take. What is our expected response time between when someone first opens an issue or a PR and when that PR receives a response, the first time that it is touched by a person in SIG-Docs. And what we're looking at right now is we're looking at the average week view over the past year. And if you can look at July 1st, that was shortly after I started. And you can see that there's a really big spike that's coming close to 2 weeks right at the week of 7/9. And I started wondering, why is that? What's the reason for that spike? And then, of course, if you realize that that's the week view, that includes the 4th of July holiday and the long weekend associated with it. So that was the explanation there. And then it tapers off nicely. And then if you look again, shortly after release 1.9, there's another large spike in the week. And that is representative and inclusive of the Christmas holiday. So our response times in general are pretty good. They're less than, on average, 4 days between when a PR is opened and when it is first touched, if you look over the course of the past year. So Paris, I'm going to ask that you switch from the week period to the day period. Thank you, because there are some interesting, it's just slightly more granular here. And if you look shortly before the release of 1.9, there's that giant spike that heads towards almost 5.5 weeks. And I was very concerned when I initially saw this, because that did not correlate meaningfully with the time shown in the week average. So I looked at those specific dates, and if you look at those dates for those spikes, that is December 2nd through December 5th. And I was thinking, what was going on then? Oh, right, KubeCon. And that was when I started merging all of the feature PRs for 1.9. So that explains the giant spikes there. And I think that we'll continue to see some spikes in average response time associated with quarterly releases. But if you look, and Paris, if you don't mind switching back to the week view, please. If you look at the average weekly view since the first of the year, you'll notice that that average time has shrunk considerably. In some cases, in most cases, less than 1 day. And what that is tied to specifically is the implementation of prow in the Kubernetes website repository. So our much lower average times to PR touches is really thanks to the prow team and to Test Infra and Aaron Krickenberger in particular for helping prow go live in Kubernetes website. So right now, our service level objective for PR touches is 1 week, but as you can see, that's excessive in comparison to what our actual performance is. So after 1.10, I'd like to revisit that time with SIG-Docs and give genuine consideration to shrinking that to 2 days, because right now the evidence that we have supports that. And it's the only compelling argument I can see against it is that there are weekends inclusive of that. So this is I guess part of the discussion includes which period on this graph we look at. A weekly average I think is very helpful, but a day I think would show sort of spiky times related to weekends where PR touches, the time to PR touch rose over 3 business days, or 3 days inclusive of weekends. So this is a really valuable tool because it gives us actual data about which to base our objectives and on which to revise them. So I guess that's all I have. This is the graph of the week. Thank you.
Great. Any questions? Going once, going twice. Okay, next we have all the SIG updates. First is SIG apps with Adnan. Are you around?
Hey, yep. Let me just share my screen here. Okay, can you all see that?
Looking great.
Cool. So hey everyone, yep, my name's Adnan Abdul Hussain, and I'm going to give the SIG apps update today. So I am one of the co-leads of SIG apps, and with the awesome Ken Owens and Matt Farina, we make up the three leads for SIG apps. So what is SIG apps? We basically, our main focus is to just discuss how people are defining and running applications on top of Kubernetes, whether that be business applications or extensions to Kubernetes, controllers, and stuff like that. So one of the parts of that is the Kubernetes core code that we own, which is the workloads API. So things like deployments, stateful sets, daemon sets, all that good stuff. Batch API, like the jobs and cron jobs. So we're continuously working on improving those and driving more features into those. And then the other side of the spectrum is this greater apps ecosystem, where you have a bunch of tools around how people are deploying applications on top of Kubernetes. So this is things like Helm, for example, or Ksonnet on how people are defining those applications, and Kcompose, and the whole range of different tools there. So obviously we talked to a lot of users of Kubernetes, application operators and application developers. And from those discussions, we drive a lot of feedback back into Kubernetes, and implementing new features where we see kind of shortfalls in things, both in the workloads API and apps and tooling. SIG apps is kind of often seen as a place where people start their Kubernetes journey. It's kind of most users of Kubernetes are running applications on Kubernetes, so it's kind of a natural place for them to come in and start discussing things, and then that kind of starts off their journey into the contributing more to the Kubernetes community. So we kind of like to help users get more involved where they can. If you like demos, we have a lot of those. So we typically have at least one, but usually 2 demos a week in our meetings, and those just range from all the different kind of tools that we cover, and some new things that are coming up in the ecosystem. So we last kind of at the end of the last year, we had a 1.9 retrospective. So thanks to Jace for coming and leading us through those. So two of the kind of good things that came out of 1.9 was that we really doubled down on some of the flaky tests. So now we have a lot less flaky tests, which is always a good thing. The other kind of big news is that the workloads API went to GA in 1.9. So now we have the V1 group version in the apps group. Things that could have gone better, some feedback that we got from that retrospective. So we would like to see more adoption of Client Go and other Kubernetes clients. I think there's still some older tooling out there that's still relying on Kubernetes. So we kind of really want to work with those tools and those developers to try and get people to adopt Client Go more. And also help to weed out some of the issues in adopting Client Go. And also, one of the other feedbacks that we got was that it's kind of hard for people to test unreleased versions of Kubernetes, so alpha releases or beta releases, before a cloud provider adopts them or Minikube adopts it. So if there's some sort of tooling that we can provide to help people test their application tools on newer versions of Kubernetes before they're released, that's something that we want to work towards, because what happens right now is it tends to be a lag of about a week or 2 before tools catch up to the latest versions of Kubernetes. So quick update on the workload side of things. I think for 110, it's kind of sailing forward, but soon we'll be starting the planning for 111. For daemon set in particular, I think in 110 it's going to be using the default scheduler. So in the Helm world, last month, we had the Helm Summit, which was kind of a 2-day developer summit, single track of sessions. So there were 11 sessions and 15 lightning talks. And then at the end, there was a Q&A with the Helm and Charts core maintainers that could make it. And then on the second day, there was a half-day kind of unconference style discussion around planning for Helm v3. So you can read all the notes from those sessions. So there's a repository in the Kubernetes Helm org here, Helm Summit Notes, where you can kind of see all the discussions that went on there. And all the sessions have been recorded on our on this YouTube link, which is also in these slides. These slides, by the way, are in the community meeting notes, so you can find those links there. And then Taylor Thomas, one of the core maintainers of Helm, wrote a summary of how the Helm Summit went, so you can give that a read as well. So then on Helm v3 stuff, so planning kind of started at the Helm Summit, and that's kind of been going on. So one of the things that we've been putting together is user profiles or personas to try and help drive some of the features that are going to be developed as part of Helm 3. And some of those proposals are being evaluated and stuff. On the chart side of things, so we have some stats now. So thanks to Vic, we have an idea of how many people are downloading charts from the Kubernetes stable and incubator chart repositories. And just in 2018, we've had 60,000 unique IPs download charts, which is pretty great. In the repo in general, we've had more than 3 times as many PRs merged in the past month, and 1.75 times as many issues have been closed in the past month. And I think this speaks a lot to some of the automation that we've been building around the charts repository. So one of the things that we've done is implemented owners files for each chart, so that we can delegate some of the releasing of those charts to the chart maintainers, rather than having a repo maintainer be able to go and improve those. And then one of the things that we're working on is a best practices document, so that we can point people to various things. This is how you go and implement RBAC in the chart, or this is how you go and implement persistent volume claims and stuff like that, so that we can have like a standard place where we can document all the best practices for writing charts. So a couple of months ago, we had a working group spin-off from SIG-Apps called the Application Definition Working Group. And the idea was to essentially come up with a declarative way to manage applications on top of Kubernetes. And one of the things that has come from this is this application CRD, which started as a KEP. And the idea is to essentially group together some metadata about an application, and also the resources that an application has as part of it. And then the idea is that some tools such as Helm or KSonnet would essentially create these application CRD objects, and then other tools like user interfaces, for example, or kubectl, dashboard, kubeapps could then interact with this application resource, and then show information about the applications running in the cluster in a kind of standard way. So there's some ideas about a controller to go alongside with this, which could do things like have application level health checks, adding owner references to the resources so that they can be garbage collected. And all of that development is going to happen out of this SIG hosted repository. So it's apps application. The link is here. So one of the things that we're doing is trying out this new SIG hosted repo process, so we can provide feedback on how that process will go as well. But if you're interested in this, definitely check out this repo. It's a bit bare bones right now, but everything's going to be developed there. So what's next for SIG-Apps? I've kind of talked about most of this already, but just to kind of summarize. So obviously, we're going to be facilitating the discussion around this application CRD and the proposals around that. And again, the development's going to happen out of that SIG-hosted repo. We want to some of the stuff that came from that retrospective, things like improving the usage of client Go and providing more feedback there. So hopefully working more with SIG API machinery on some of that stuff. Coming up with some sort of documentation or a tool to make it easier for people to test releases of Kubernetes that haven't been released yet with the applications they're building. Helm v3 is obviously going to be a big thing for SIG apps going forward, and helping drive some of the discussions there and putting feedback into that process. And some of the changes for charts, just improving what we're already doing in terms of automation and also building out that best practices guide. So the last thing I wanted to mention was that we'll be at KubeCon EU. So there's going to be an intro session, which is kind of going to be a bit like this, but a bit longer, where we'll go through kind of all the different applications that are, all the different tools that are under the SIG apps belt, and in more detail, and also have demos of all the different things. And then we'll have a deep dive session as well, which has been really kind of useful for SIG apps in past KubeCons. We'll just have kind of in-person, unconference style discussions around all the different things that are going on in SIG apps. So hopefully see you in one of those.
One thing, we are not migrating daemon set to the default scheduler of 110. There is an alpha gated feature that will allow work to progress for priority and preemption, which is what this whole thing is support. But definitely, it's still going to be the same behavior that you get in 1.9 and 1.10.
Thanks, Ken.
Okay. Anything else before we move on to SIG-OpenStack? All right, Chris, take it away.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Hodge, and I'm with the OpenStack Foundation. And thanks for the time for us sharing the SIG-OpenStack update. Let me share my screen here. We'll start off with an introduction to the current SIG leadership and the recent leadership update that we had at the last KubeConf. The SIG-OpenStack is led by myself, David Lyle from Intel, and Robert Morse from Ticketmaster. And I wanted to give some special thanks to the outgoing SIG leagues, Igor Dobretsky from the CNCF, whose responsibilities expanded with his new position, and so he stepped down, and Stephen Gordon from Red Hat. They ran the SIG for, I want to say, for about a couple of years, and they did a fantastic job. And I want to thank them for all of the work that they did. So one of the major efforts that we had during the 1.10 release cycle was the formation of a partner organization within OpenStack called OpenStack SIG Kubernetes. Essentially, this is an official recognition within the OpenStack community of the SIG Kubernetes OpenStack leadership and organization. We have the same leaders, we have the same meetings, and we hold the same objectives. But the idea is that because this is a cross-community effort, it allows us to take advantage of OpenStack resources in an official capacity. So this means that at our OpenStack summits, we can have forum sessions, we get development rooms at the project team gathering, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We just had one in Dublin, and we had an entire day devoted to Kubernetes and OpenStack collaborations, as well as the opportunity to have repository hosting with Garrett Code Review and OpenStack infra testing. We see this as kind of a unique governance structure that is primarily here to encourage cross-community collaboration. So we've attended a number of events with, where SIG-OpenStack has had representation. This has included the OpenStack PTG in Denver, which is where we had our first SIG Kubernetes formation meeting. The OpenStack Summit in Australia, where we had our second formation meeting, as well as, the summit itself had 25 presentations, workshops, and forum sessions devoted to OpenStack and Kubernetes integrations. We also met at the KubeConf and Cloud Native Con in North America, One thing notable that came out of this effort was joint community leadership meetings. This is kind of a hallway track led by Terry Carrez, who's the Vice President of Development at the OpenStack Foundation, as well as our first Kubernetes SIG-OpenStack, OpenStack SIG Kubernetes joint update and deep dives. We were also at the inaugural Helm Summit in Portland. It was a really fantastic event. We had participation by the Cola OpenStack Helm team, Loki core contributors. Loki is container packaging for OpenStack projects, as well as the SIG leadership, and a full-day meeting and workspace at the OpenStack PTG gathering in Dublin. One of the nice outcomes that came out of this was a definition of the the core interest categories with within the OpenStack and Kubernetes collaboration, including the Magnum team, which is API-driven Kubernetes on OpenStack, deploying OpenStack on Kubernetes, using Helm, other OpenStack installers, various integration points across OpenStack projects, including Octavia, which is a load balancer service, Fuxi, which is storage connection, Courier, which is provides a network overlay, Manila, which is also a file storage, and Keystone for authentication and authorization, as well as a number of different SDKs, container interface points, and Kubernetes development tools. If you want to kind of see some of the outcomes of that, this Etherpad is publicly available, and and we'll also be having a write-up of the event later on. Upcoming events with SIG OpenStack representation are going to be the Open Networking Summit. We're going to have a number of community leadership meetings. If this is something that you're interested in joining us for, please reach out to me on Slack. We'll also be at KubeConf, we'll also be at KubeConf Europe. We'll also be providing SIG updates and the deep dive working sessions, as well as a Kata containers talk and an OpenStack provider introduction talk. Of course, the OpenStack Summit of Vancouver will have a full schedule selection, including a number of container-based talks. We have a container infrastructure track, as well as we're running a side conference at that, which is not OpenStack branded, but is focused on it's a collaborative community event focused on CI and CD, and we're going to have a number of different leaders from the CI/CD community. If this is something you're interested in attending, also please reach out to me, and I would be happy to connect you with the right people for that. Continuing with our major SIG efforts, so one of the KEPs that's in effect is the externalization of all of the Kubernetes cloud providers. And so this has been a major effort that has taken place in the 1.10 release. We've forked the OpenStack cloud provider into an external project managed in the OpenStack community. Currently, this is being hosted in DIMS's GitHub repository with regular feature updates to it, and also syncing with the Kubernetes upstream efforts as those arrive. And we're currently considering options for the final localization of the provider code. The two major options in front of us are within the Kubernetes organization. Working group cloud provider has a pull request in to create Kubernetes hosted repositories for all of the major providers, including AWS, GCE, Azure, and OpenStack. Another option is within hosting it within OpenStack Garrett. This is a topic of active discussion, and we're looking for a resolution to that fairly soon. But if you have any strong feelings about that or input on the final disposition of that, please stop by the SIG OpenStack channel and chat with us. Work that we've done is the external provider tree has several integration points into OpenStack. The entry provider has been mirrored there and developed. We're planning on a deprecation in 1.10 and removal in 1.12. The external provider, gives external and internal LBAS support, with both Octavia and Neutron LBAS as a service. It also integrates, has LVM iSCSI integration with Cinder and Ceph RDB integration with Cinder. And so these are all things that are provided out of the box with the provider. The repository also contains a number of different Cinder integrations. We have a standalone provider with LVM iSCSI and Ceph RDB scenarios. And we also have a flex volume driver and a CSI volume driver. And so if you're interested in using Cinder as a volume provider for your volume storage, we actually have kind of these Kubernetes native ways of integrating Cinder. And Cinder supports somewhere around 80 different storage drivers. We've also made improvements on routing and IPv6. And so for nodes that have more than one internal IP address, we have a new algorithm that chooses the correct route that works for both IPv4 and IPv6. And there was some error in IPv6 support, which we fixed by supporting the matching network types and forcing next hop to be in the same network space. We've also made some major updates to Keystone authentication code. This is the code that allows Keystone to be an external authentication and authorization provider for Kubernetes. We removed the experimental code from upstream, and we've replaced it with we replaced it with an external provider for Keystone that uses webhooks. If you'd like to see an example of how this works, Severio Proto, ZI Proto in Slack, has a pretty good blog posting about how he set up Keystone authentication for Kubernetes clusters. We've also worked on developing end-to-end testing within the CNCF CI/CD cloud. We merged the initial deployment of that code into the cross-cloud repository. We've run into some load balancer bugs, and so we're still tweaking that and updating the provider on that. I pushed those major bug fixes over the last week, and we're looking at full test integration in late February, early March. Eventually, we're going to have this work incorporate the migration to the external cloud provider. Future efforts are going to have a lot more testing. This is going to include gate jobs for the external provider in OpenStack Infra. We're taking advantage of new features in Zool v3, which is a CI/CD driver developed by the OpenStack community. They've added features that allow hooking into GitHub, and so we'll be able to trigger jobs as with third-party testing. We have a proof of concept running inside an organization called Open Lab, which was founded by Huawei but is being community managed. And we're not just doing Kubernetes testing, but also a testing of other open source software development kits and plugin platforms. And so if you have SDKs that you're looking for, that either hook into OpenStack or Kubernetes or any other sort of, public cloud application provider, you can feel free to get in touch with us about that, and we'd be happy to help you set up testing for that. As well as continued work with the CNCF CI/CD to support the external provider. There are also a number of projects within OpenStack that kind of fall under our leadership and advocacy. We have OpenStack on Kubernetes, which uses which is OpenStack Helm is producing Helm charts to deploy OpenStack on top of Kubernetes infrastructure. There's Kubernetes on top of OpenStack. Magnum is under heavy support. We support all of the latest versions, including 1.10 alpha. RBAC support by default, Flannel and Calico support. With CERN being one of the major users, right now they're managing 115 independent Kubernetes clusters ranging from 1.74 to 1.10, as well as a number of public clouds, including Bexhost, City Network, and EasyStack, all providing Kubernetes clusters through Magnum interfaces, as well as Catalyst and American Airlines working towards production. We have an independent container project called Zune, which provides it's a smaller API surface that provides Kubernetes pods through an API abstraction. container networking overlay from the Courier project that supports, it started as a Docker networking interface, and now Courier Kubernetes has a full network overlay if you want to integrate your Kubernetes networking with your OpenStack virtual machine networking. These are projects that are being actively developed within the OpenStack community. So if you're interested in collaborating with any of these efforts, we have a Slack channel, SIG-OpenStack, as well as Kubernetes SIG-OpenStack mailing list. We also have our bi-weekly SIG meetings. These with the daylight savings that's coming up this weekend, these are going to be happening Wednesdays at 1600 PDT or 23 UTC. It was formerly 0 UTC on Thursdays, but we've adjusted this for US daylight savings time. And that is it for my update. Does anybody have any questions? Okay.
Let's see. Hold on. I think we have one in chat. There were some efforts around running OpenStack on Kubernetes. Is that within the SIG charter? And then Dibs answers, yes, it is. I don't know if you wanted to add any clarification to that. Okay. Questions? Last chance? Okay. Thank you very much, Chris. Moving on. Sebastian Florex from SIG UI sends his regrets. He's unfortunately unable to attend, so I've pasted the notes of their last meetings there into the notes document. The big change here is that both leads are now tasked to do other things, so they don't have as much time to work on the dashboard as they would like, and they need some help moving things to Angular 5. And I've put all the links to their GitHub pull requests and things, and a link to their SIG UI notes so that you can check that out. And with that, we will move on to announcements. Philip Whitrock.
Hi, I'm here. Okay, so I want to get a quick update from the steering committee on some of the work being done around SIG governance and sub-projects. I'm pasting in the notes links to some relevant docs that people can go look up afterwards. But the update is that we have released the first iteration of SIG governance charters and requirements. You can go look up that link, and it's split into essentially the requirements section, which is like, these are the things you need to have defined and figured out how you're going to address. And then a short template that gives a piece that outlines how a SIG could address those things by splitting up responsibilities into specific roles and setting up certain processes around monitoring their tests and making decisions. We're continuing to work on this. We'll continue to iterate on it. The charter that's listed there is intentionally meant to be short so that folks have something they don't have to spend all day reading. That as a result of that, it means that there's probably some specific decision for each SIG here and there that is like, how do I handle this one case, right? Sort of thing. And so we're going to release a very long, detailed template as well that tries to cover as many cases we can think of and all the cases that SIGs bring to us, and outline specific step-by-step processes for how you address those things. And the intention is that SIGs can start out with a small charter and then look at the long charter, pull the pieces over they need from that. Or maybe just start with the long charter if you're like really into governance. Two notable changes that folks will probably notice from the charters. The first is the introduction of sub-projects. So this is continuing to be fleshed out a bit, the fine details of this, and you can see a link to a sub-project meta document there. But from a high-level perspective, we're formalizing the notion that sub-areas that a SIG manages or owns can be broken up into their own projects with their own leaders and their own TLs, and their own release structure and decision-making processes and all this sort of stuff, so that the individuals there can be the escalation points for those areas. The other change that you may notice in the charter is the definition of two roles that are currently the SIG role now. So the SIG role did not mean the same thing across SIGs. In some SIGs, it meant this is the technical escalation point. In other SIGs, it meant this did not mean this is a technical escalation point, and it's more a role for managing operations of the SIG. And so not having this role consistent between SIGs made it hard to go from one SIG to another and know exactly how things are run. It also meant that by having this as one single role, in certain SIGs, individuals who maybe are the actual technical, should be the technical escalation points, it's not clear that they are because the SIG lead is maybe the technical escalation point. Or vice versa, folks who want to help with leadership, outside technical leadership, or didn't have that opportunity. So we split that up into two separate roles. You can still have the same person doing both, just now it's really clear that they have both responsibilities instead of being ambiguous about what responsibilities they have. More about that, explanations behind that in the back, which is the last link there. We're putting together a WISE, essentially. So in addition to the documenting all the how do I do this that we get from SIGs and trying to put that into a process document, we're also going to working on documenting the like, why did you choose to do it this way, so that everyone can see that. Thanks.
And is that it? How are, just a random question for the group, how are people getting on with their SIG charters? Any outstanding questions while we have Philip here, or?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Awesome.
So I think the question is, I think that the desire generally, maybe you can keep me honest on this, the desire generally is to be a bit more formal about tracking SIG members as a thing. Not sure, maybe I've missed it, but some direction about how, like, we really don't want that stuff to be in like meeting, like this is something that we would expect to be changed pretty often, like doing pull requests through onto the SIG, the main SIG community place. You know, doc is probably not the right way to do it. Did you have any guidance or suggestion on that?
Is your question what are the recommendations for tracking SIG membership, or why are we proposing such?
No, I
think to try to feel that.
Hear why?
Yeah, sure.
I'm really asking about the mechanics. So I totally get
So Bob, it kind of depends on what purpose you want to track members. If it's for communication purposes, we're not proposing any changes to existing mechanisms in terms of the mailing lists and GitHub teams. If you're asking about decision-making processes like votes or things like that, what we are proposing is that those be recorded in owners files and checked in. So what we're recommending is that the SIG identify roles that need to be filled, sort of like the release team. We have existing roles already. At the sub-project level, we have reviewers, approvers, and now owners, which are the sub-project leads. If the SIG identifies additional roles that need to be filled, those should be documented in owners files. So you can add comments and review those changes and have an audit trail and all those sorts of things. So the set of people with specific roles in the sub-projects and SIGs would be in owners files. The people who just want to get communications and are free to participate in meetings and things like that, but don't have any official role, would just use the existing mechanisms.
That sounds pretty good. Thank you.
One fine point on that, and I don't think we have this totally locked down there, but my guess of where I think this might go is that the set of members for decision-making purposes will, across all the SIGs, will essentially become the folks that have standing for doing things like electing the steering committee and things like that. And so that gets us into a much more both distributed and formal process around that. I don't think we have that documented in a sort of super agreed upon way yet, but something to think about around that. That would be my handicap there.
Okay, any other questions on SIG charters? Okay, moving on, just 3 quick announcements. Just another reminder that the Contributor Summit is having a KubeCon EU the day before. That's 1 May. You can click through to the link there, and then we have both tracks, and there's a SIG Docs track as well if you're interested in that. The CNCF would like some feedback on the draft blog post for the 1.10 beta. release, follow the link and you can contact Natasha Woods. I left her email there as part of the notes. And last thing for the week is the shout outs. We have hash shout outs on Slack, so if someone's doing a great job and you want to see them recognized a little bit above and beyond, we mention everybody every week. So this week, the release team would like to mention Maru Newby, Cole Wagner, and Benjamin Elder, who've been all super helpful in getting this release moving forward. And then all the contributors who hung out on the Hangouts for the Meet Our Contributors, Ask Us Anything sessions that we have, where we have existing contributors sit in a live stream similar to this and have new contributors ask them questions. So big shout outs to Aaron Krickenberger, Dims, Ilya Dmitrichenko, Jennifer Rondo, Chris Nova, Solly Ross, Jeff Grafton, and George Castro. And with that concludes the meeting. Any last questions? Diane Mueller asks, any link to request an invite to the Cube Contributor Summit? We have not yet gotten to the point due to the size of the venue where we feel that we're going to do invites. But if we do have a capacity limit, we'll approach that problem when we get there. So currently, right now, if you're an existing contributor, you shouldn't have to do any extra steps. Any other questions before we break? All right, and with that, everyone gets 9 minutes back. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and we'll see you all next week.